Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be talking about the brand new buffs that the Hexenzirkel will be bringing. We'll be going over all of the base changes, all of the constellation changes, and talking about the future of Genshin. But first, just a quick word from today's sponsor. Thank you so much to Aniba for sponsoring today's video. If you are looking for a place to top up in your favorite gacha games, I cannot recommend Aniba more. Aniba is your one-stop shop for all of your gaming needs. Whether you're looking for digital game keys, gift cards, software, or in-game top-ups, this is your best choice. It also offers secure purchases, with every seller being vetted and your orders protected. They have 24-hour global support with an amazing team ready to assist. Delivery is fast and the savings are unbeaten. When topping up in your favorite gacha games like Genshin Impact, Honkai Star Rail, or Zenless Zone Zero, Aniba not only offer competitive discounts on in-game currency, but also provide cashback for further savings. And as an official partner for Genshin's top-up distributor, it makes topping up for cheap 100% safe. But you don't just have to take my word for it. Aniba has a 4.3 rating on Trustpilot, with over 160,000 positive reviews. Please feel free to use my affiliate link in the description to start saving, and now let's get back into the video. Wolfie's doing a little jig, look at him. You get it, King. Off he goes. Look at him. Look at that little guy.
I have to go to work.
Good morning, gamers. Today we're having a quiet good morning, gamers. I am not very well. I'm a little bit sick. I don't feel very well at the moment, but I still wanted to make a video because I wanted to talk about the new Hexerei buffs, and I want to talk about them buffing older units. I want to talk about what I think about these new buffs. I want to talk about everything. I want to talk about the precedent that it sets. I want to chat about it. So we're going to talk about it. And I'm actually quite excited to get straight into this video. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be looking at the before changes and we're going to be looking at the after changes, what they do to the character, whether they change the gameplay, whether they change their teams. But first and foremost, it is so important that you guys understand, because I'm seeing so many people throw around team compositions, new character builds, and I just think that it's really important that we remember these buffs will only be active if you have 2 Hexerei members in your team. Meaning, in order for these buffs to be active and to be present within your team, you need to have 2 of either Venti, Sucrose, Mona, Albedo, Razor, Klee, Fischl, or Durin in order for these to work. So please just be aware, these aren't like permanent buffs that the characters will just have. They need to have at least 2 other Hexerei team members for these buffs to be active. I have seen so many people be like, oh my god, I can't wait to run this team, and it's 1 Hexerei unit. So please be aware, you have to have 2 of them in your team for this to work. Starting off with Venti, given that he will also be now given a new signature weapon. Once again, this man is collecting signature weapons like they are Pokemon cards. The main thing that you want to know about Venti's update is to do with his burst. Venti will now have enhanced normal attacks. After using his elemental burst, they turned into wind sunder arrows, dealing anemo damage to enemies along their path. Also, when a character on the field triggers a swirl reaction, the character's damage and Stormeye damage will be increased. Venti's burst scalings aren't particularly impressive, meaning they aren't going to do a great amount of damage, especially if you don't have him on a crit build. Most people will have Venti on a support build, especially given these current changes. The infusion to his normal attacks really sort of incentivizes you to play him as an on-field driver in the same way that you would play somebody like Hazo or Sucrose. And with that being said, you're not going to put him on a crit build. You'll be putting him on full EM in the same way that you would do with an off-field burst support. Venti will also be getting changes to his C1, 2, 4, and 6. So in essence, every single constellation that isn't talent levels will be getting a buff or a slight change. Venti C1 originally fires 2 additional arrows per aimed shot, each dealing 33% of the original arrow's damage. With the Hexerei buffs, additionally 2 extra arrows that will track opponents will be fired per wind sunder arrow, which will be his new converted normal attacks during his burst, each dealing 20% of the original arrow's damage. Generally speaking, this will be a nice little extra swirl for more anemo application if you want to run him in a swirl team. It's not going to be the biggest DPS increase if you're interested in that. Venti C2 originally is Skyward Sonic, which is his elemental skill decreases opponents' animo res and physical res by 12% for 10 seconds. Opponents launched by Skyward Sonnet suffer an additional 12% animo res and physical res shred while airborne. Basically, this means that just only small enemies that can be picked up by his elemental skill will be affected by this additional res shred. His C2 after the Hexerei buffs is a little more complex. Skyward Sonnet, his elemental skill, decreases opponents' animo res and physical res by 24% for 10 seconds. Additionally, after unleashing the elemental burst Wind's Grand Ode, Venti gains the Wherever a Breeze Blows effect, and the cooldown for his elemental skill, Skyward Sonnet, is reset. After a Wind Sunder Arrow, which is his infused normal attack, hits an opponent, there is also a 25% chance for Venti to gain the Wherever a Breeze Blows effect, which in essence, when pressing to unleash the elemental skill Skyward Sonnet, 300% of the original amount of damage is dealt. This effect lasts for 15 seconds and is removed after Venti presses to use the elemental skill. The main conversation around these constellations is generally speaking a little bit difficult. Most people didn't pull for Venti constellations, and most people don't have them, meaning that these changes will either change your opinion on pulling for them, or you still won't have them. I think when it comes to limited characters, changes in constellations is a little bit more difficult around the conversation, apart from a unit like Klee, who is now on the To Temper Thyself and Journey Far event, where you can get further constellations for free. Overall, this does seem like quite a nice constellation. Once again, I think it's a constellation that you would have to see in practice rather than just in theory to see whether or not you personally see it worth it, but for those of you that do already have it, it's a nice change. Venti's original C4 says that when Venti picks up an elemental orbal particle, he receives a 25% animo damage bonus for 10 seconds. This now changes after unleashing his elemental skill or his elemental burst. Venti and his own active party members gain a 25% animo damage bonus. This turns Venti into a relatively decent animo DPS support for any kind of unit that would benefit from that stat. The one thing I will say is, obviously, as it is a C4, it does make him a very expensive support, so it's not something I would ever encourage somebody to pull for. And finally, Venti's original C6, targets who take damage from Wind's Grand Ode have their animo res decreased by 20%. If an elemental absorption occurs, then their res towards that corresponding element is also decreased by 20%. A further additional line is added after the Hexerei buffs of additionally, the damage Venti deals to these opponents will gain a crit damage bonus of 100%. Generally speaking, even back in the day, further constellations for Venti were only really beneficial for DPS-oriented builds. That has not changed with these additional buffs, but overall, the improved tracking of his burst, as well as the increased damage bonus and infusion that you gain just from having him as a Hexerei unit, I think it's a solid addition. I think it could have been better, I think it also could have been worse. Moving on, we have Alice's daughter and the nation's sweetheart, Klee. Klee is actually a really interesting one to gain buffs, and I'm wondering if whether or not this may align with Alice's kit. I'm not sure, but I do think that Klee is a very interesting character. The main change that you will see with Klee with these Hexerei buffs is to do with her burst and her normal attack. Beforehand, in order to activate Klee's burst, Sparks and Splash, you had to use a charged attack, which would deal an additional instance of pyro damage. So I'm going to burst, and this special charged attack only triggers after a charged attack. If I normal attack, it's not going to trigger, and charging triggers this little additional bit of damage. In essence, the way that they're changing Klee's kit is that after doing a round of normal attacks, so doing her 3 animations, 1, 2, 3, it will, at the end of that animation, trigger her special charged attack animation. One of the many complaints about Klee, even when she was initially released, was that her rotations felt very slow, they felt very clunky, and it wasn't very intuitive. The way that they're trying to fix this is by adding this charged attack damage to your normal attack chain rotation, whilst also increasing the speed at which she normal attacks. The one thing that I find very interesting about this change specifically to Klee is that it does open her up to weapons that, one, increase her attack speed, but also buff normal attack. As with this addition and change to her kit, this will become the easiest way to play her and most likely the most universal. I can't speak for every DPS catalyst in the game, but a lot of them aren't suitable to Klee due to the way that her kit works, and either she couldn't activate the full passive or they just weren't that good for her. In comparison, even one like Mualani's could actually benefit her due to the way that her normal attacks would now work, and she would even increase the damage of Vaporize depending on the team that you played. Overall, Talatala's Remembrance was a random weapon I put on her her for a video that I will be making later when she gets her Echo trying out DPS Klee in 2025. But in all honesty, with these changes, it might actually have been the best choice that I could have made for my Klee. Going forward, Klee has similar changes to her constellations like Venti. Her C1, 2, 4, and 6 all have changes to them. Klee's original C1, attacks and skills have a certain chance to summon sparks that bombard opponents, dealing damage equal to 120% of sparks and splash. The Hexerei buffs don't change this, but do add in a second line of for 12 seconds after triggering this effect, Klee's attack is increased by 60%. A nice little increase for Klee, especially if you were lucky enough to choose C1 Klee during the most recent To Temper Thyself and Journey Far event. Given this attack buff, I honestly do kind of recommend if you enjoy Klee, especially after the changes are made, she may be a good selection for the next event. Her original C2, being hit by Jumpty Dumpty's Mind, decrease opponent's defense by 23% for 10 seconds, is one of the better constellations that Klee has ever had. There are few constellations in the game that have def reduction, most of them being further constellations of 5-star units, for example, Raiden Shogun's C2. This does change with the Hexerei buffs to specifically saying when Klee's elemental skill hits an opponent, that opponent's defense will be decreased by 23% for 10 seconds. All that means, instead of having to be hit by the mines, it now just has to be hit by the elemental skill. So in essence, I could do this, and that would have triggered it, rather than them needing to be hit by these little vines that spawn afterwards, which do have a specific interval in which they're going to trigger. It will apply that defense reduction at a much quicker rate, meaning that you'll have higher DPS levels earlier in the start of your rotation rather than later. Klee C4 originally says that if Klee leaves the field during her duration of Sparks and Splash, her elemental burst, her departure triggers an explosion that deals 555% of her attack as AoE pyro damage. C4 Klee has been renowned in the community for being her best supportive constellation apart from her C2. The Hexerei buffs do change this constellation, but not in a bad way. An explosion will be triggered if Klee leaves the field whilst Sparks and Splash is active, or when it ends, dealing 555% of her attack as AoE pyro damage. If Klee is on field when the explosion occurs, its damage will be increased by 100%, giving a nice little boost of damage towards the end of her burst rotation, which will in turn increase her DPS levels. Overall, I think turning this from a supportive constellation into one that also buffs her while she is on field is an interesting choice, and I actually quite like it. And finally, Klee's original C6. Whilst under the effects of Sparks and Splash, Klee will regenerate 3 energy for all members of the party, excluding herself, every 3 seconds. When Sparks and Splash is used, all party members will gain a 10% pyro damage bonus for 25 seconds. The Hexerei buff will change that when Klee uses an explosive spark, there is a 50% chance it will not be consumed. Additionally, while Sparks and Splash is active, Klee's normal attacks have a 40% chance on the first and second hits to consume an explosive spark, dealing an additional attack equivalent to Boom Boom Strike to her opponent. An explosive spark is in her A1 passive. When Jumpty Dumpty and normal attacks deal damage, Klee has a 50% chance to obtain an explosive spark. This explosive spark is consumed by the next charged attack, which costs no stamina and deals 50% increased damage. In essence, whilst it can be a little bit confusing because of the naming of certain things, what this does is instead of having to use a charged attack to deal damage equivalent to a Boom Boom Strike, I don't want this clipped on the internet of me saying the words Boom Boom Strike. In essence, Klee's normal attacks have a 40% chance on the first and second hit to consume the explosive spark, which will deal the equivalent damage of if you were doing a charged attack. I'm really intrigued to try Klee with her new buffs, and having that charged attack hit at the end of her normal attack chain I think will be really interesting, and also I just want to see how much faster they make her normal attacks. Moving on, next we have Albedo. The main thing about Albedo that they've changed, which I think is really interesting, is they fixed a main gripe that players had about him. The main thing about Albedo is his solar isotomas, which in essence were really easily destroyed by enemies, which meant that you weren't getting that geo application, which meant that you either weren't getting shards or you weren't doing damage. The way that they've decided to combat this is that after using your elemental skill and it successfully hits an enemy, the same skill will also generate a silver isotoma. All you really need to know about this silver isotoma is that it provides an additional party-wide damage bonus, and when the solar isotoma is destroyed by an enemy, any silver isotoma on the field will gain the same effect as the solar isotoma, generating the transient blossom effect to continue assisting attacking the enemy. So in essence, instead of changing his kit and changing the solar isotomas to these silver ones, it is now an additional instance, which will remain on field and cannot be destroyed. Additionally, after generating a silver isotoma similar to the way that solar isotomas work, Hexerei party members members' normal attacks, charged attacks, plunging attacks, elemental skill, and burst damage are increased by 10% for every 1000 defense that Albedo has for 20 seconds, with the maximum being 30%. Generally speaking, given that Albedo normally has around 2500 to 3000 defense anyway, it's a pretty easy benchmark to hit. Similar to the previous characters, C1, 2, 4, and 6 have all had slight changes. The original C1, transient blossoms generated by Albedo's Ambiogenesis Solar Isotoma regenerate 1.2 energy for Albedo. The Hexerei buffs will have this additional part of the use of Albedo's elemental skill Ambiogenesis Solar Isotoma also increases his defense by 50% for the next 20 seconds. Once again, Albedo being a unit that you could grab a constellation for free of during the To Temper Thyself and Journey Afar event, it's a nice addition. The defense increase is nice, it will increase his damage, it will increase the buff that you can provide. It's a really overall a good constellation. Albedo C2 is originally his strongest and easiest early investment for his build. In essence, all you really need to know about Albedo C2 is that it provides a defense scaling to his burst, which previously scaled off of attack. Albedo at his core at C0 is a split scaler between attack and defense. This makes it a little bit easier to be solely providing him with defense instead of a split scaling. The Hexerei buffs add in a second part of this constellation that when Albedo is not on the field and when the stack count of Fatal Reckoning reaches 4, all stacks of Fatal Reckoning are consumed. This will in turn generate 3 Fatal Blossoms near your character, which will violently bloom to deal AoE geo damage equal to 300% of Albedo's defense. Damage that will also be considered elemental burst damage. Where the passive talent Homuncular Nature has also been unlocked, the elemental mastery of nearby party members will also increase by 125 for 10 seconds. Once again, it's a nice damage boost to an already strong constellation for Albedo's kit. His original C4 has active party members within the Solar Isotoma field have their plunging attack damage increased by 30%. This C4 will change to additionally include a passive when the active party member on the team jumps near a Silver Isotoma. The Silver Isotoma will be destroyed, which greatly increases the height of the jump, and for the next 3 seconds, said character will deal 30% more plunging attack ground impact damage. Whilst I would say the Albedo plunge attack meta probably never was the strongest and probably isn't now, it's still a fun little thing and an interesting passive to build around. Finally, Albedo C6 has an active party member within the Solar Isotoma field who are protected by a shield created by crystallization, have an increased damage of 17%. This Hexerei buff changes that after using his elemental burst, Rite of Progeniture Tectonic Tide, it will destroy all silver isotomas present on the field, and whenever a silver isotoma is destroyed this way, the current instance of elemental burst will also remove 4 stacks of Fatal Reckoning from the constellation opening a Phanerozoic. This increases the damage dealt by Fatal Blossoms by 250% of Albedo's defense for the next 20 seconds. Overall, these constellations focus on increasing Albedo's damage rather than making him a team-wide support. I think this is a really fun way to play Albedo. Obviously, very few people even have Albedo anyway these days, so very few people will actually get to experience the further constellations, but for people that were lucky enough to either pull for C1 or 2 or already have him and can pick him in the To Temper Thyself and Journey Far event, the early constellation changes are really strong in my opinion, and I think that they're really good going forward. Next up, we have the standard character Mona. Mona is one of the more interesting changes due to the Hexerei buffs. Whether that's because she's a direct student or not, I'm not entirely sure, but these buffs are, in my opinion, game-changing, in the sense that Mona now becomes one of the best in slot team members and best in slot supports over some 5-star limited editions. Mona will gain a vaporized damage boost as well as a longer elemental burst duration, which in turn will increase her capabilities as a supportive unit. Normal and charged attacking after using her elemental burst can increase the duration of Omen State. And once again, like many of the 5-star characters we've talked about today, her constellation 1, 2, 4, and 6 will see a change in their stats. The main thing that you need to know about Mona's Hexerei buffs is that when Mona's normal attack or charged attack hits an opponent, she will gain 1 stack of Astral Glow of Mercury. When other party members trigger a vaporized reaction on an enemy, all of the stacks will be consumed. Each stack that is consumed will increase the damage of vaporized reaction by 5%. And additionally, when her NAs or CAs do hit an opponent, the enemy's Omen duration is extended by 2 seconds. This effect can trigger at most once every 0.5 seconds and can extend the Omen by up to 8 seconds, which in terms of a DPS rotation is a significant amount of time to have increased. Mona's original C1 has already seen some changes during Nodcry to also feature lunar charge damage. Whilst all of these numbers still remain the same, it's important to note that with the Hexerei buffs, when your off-field party member triggers any of the above effects, the damage bonus to the above Hydra-related activated elemental reaction is enhanced to 160% of its original effect. A really strong change and a really good boost in damage for a character that is free. In essence, you can obtain a C1 Mona for free in a year. Every anniversary is now giving out a free standard character selector, as well as the addition of the To Temper Thyself and Journey Far event. A C1 Mona is entirely free. No 50/50s need to be lost, no pity needs to be built. This is an insane character to be able to just have for free on your account. And the best part is about Mona is she is a standard character, meaning that you can lose to her, or you can get her on a standard banner. Or if you're a long-term player and you plan to stick around for a while, you can easily start collecting these constellations. Moving on to Mona's C2, when a normal attack hits, there is a 20% chance that it will automatically be followed by a charged attack. This does slightly change with the Hexerei buffs, that within 5 seconds after Mona unleashes her elemental burst, her next normal attack that hits an enemy will automatically trigger a charged attack. This charged attack effect can only occur once every 5 seconds, but when Mona's charged attack hits an opponent, all nearby party members have their elemental mastery increased by 80 for 12 seconds. Given that Mona generally focuses around elemental reaction teams such as Vaporize, Electrocharged, or any of those other reactions, that 80 elemental mastery can be a massive boost to your DPS and the numbers that you will see on screen. And once again, for a free character, I will say it every single time we talk about Mona's constellations. She is a free character. These constellations are easy to obtain. Moving on to her C4, when any party member attacks an opponent affected by an omen, their crit rate is increased by 15%. This gets changed that when any Hexerei party member attacks an opponent affected by this omen, their crit damage is increased by 15%. There are a couple units that can benefit from this crit damage that are Hexerei buffed. For example, Razor could benefit this, Fischl could benefit from it, but more importantly, Durin could benefit from this. And finally, Mona's original C6. Upon entering Illusory Torrent, Mona gains a 60% increase to the damage of her next charge attack per second of movement. A maximum damage bonus of 180% can be achieved in this manner. The Hexerei buff does increase this a little bit further, saying that the damage Mona's charged attack deals to the opponents affected by an omen will increase by 200% of the original damage. In terms of comparing this to her earlier constellations that we saw, it isn't the biggest buff in the world. However, overall, Mona's constellations make her a strong free-to-play contender as a great support. In a lot of teams, you will find that she has so much benefit, and because she doesn't really rely on any damage-oriented stats, she's pretty easy to build. Moving on to the Prinzessin de Verurteilung, we have Fischl. Fischl already is a very strong unit, and I think giving her buffs is a very interesting choice, but I do think it makes sense. Unlike the previous 4 characters that we've covered, Fischl only has additional changes to her C6, rather than having one on her 1st, 2nd, 4th, and 6th. However, in her base without constellation, she does have a Hexerei buff that when Oz is on field, party members gain additional buff effects. After a nearby party member triggers an overload reaction, Fischl and other nearby active party members have their attack increased by 22.5% for 10 seconds, and on the other hand, nearby party members that trigger Electrocharged or Lunar Charged, Fischl and other nearby party members have an elemental mastery increase of 90 for 10 seconds. These buffs are relatively significant when it comes to their relative reactions. Fischl is already a strong support, and these buffs are only going to further increase her utility for a lot of units. Especially because of her versatility, it makes putting her in teams with other Hexerei members relatively easy. For example, if you wanted to run her alongside Venti, she can benefit from the Lunar and Electrocharge buff. If you wanted to put her alongside Durin, she can benefit from the Overload. She's very versatile at her core, and these buffs have only made her more versatile. Her C6 constellation change is quite important, and honestly, really good. Her C6 is her best constellation, as with many units. It extends the duration of Oz's presence on field by 2 seconds, and also has Oz perform a coordinated attack with your active party member. The changes for the Hexerei buff have that the coordinated attack that Oz performs will increase the attack or elemental mastery effects of the original Hexerei buff to a 100% increase, meaning that instead of 90 elemental mastery, you will see an increase of 180. And similarly, the 22.5% attack buff changes to around 45%. These buffs are stacked, and it makes Fischl, who is an already great unit, an even better one, and I cannot recommend building your Fischl enough and trying to get her C6. Moving on, we have Sucrose. She has recently had a resurgence of her own with the addition of Flynn's because she is a fantastic free-to-play support, and I personally really enjoy her. Sucrose's Hexerei buffs have her that when she creates a small wind spirit, which is done by her elemental skill, nearby party members' normal attack, charged attack, plunge attack, elemental skill, and elemental burst damage are increased by 5.71428%. Similarly, after creating a large wind spirit, which is done via her elemental burst, nearby Hexerei party members' NA, CA's, plunge attacks, elemental skill, and burst damage is increased by 7.14285%. Similarly to Fischl, the only constellation upgrade that Sucrose has been given is to her C6. Her original C6 has a Forbidden Creation Isomer 75 Type 2 triggers an elemental absorption, which is her elemental burst. All party members will gain a 20% elemental damage bonus for the corresponding absorbed element. This does change slightly to include that Hexerei characters in the party will gain an additional 8.57142% elemental damage bonus for the corresponding absorbed element. Whilst it may look slightly insignificant to the earlier buffs that we've seen and talked about today, I still think a damage bonus that's relatively easy to activate just while doing your basic rotations to an already strong character that will only gain further relevance in my opinion as we go towards the end of Nodcry. I think it's a really good start, and I'm really excited to use Sucrose and check out the new buffs. And finally, for 4 stars, we have Razor. Razor is an interesting unit by himself. He doesn't particularly have a niche that he fits into, unlike much older units like Sucrose and Fischl, but I still think it's really interesting that he's gotten a buff. Razor's Hexerei buff has it so while the Wolf Within that is summoned by Razor's Elemental Burst Lightning Fang is active, if the Electro Sigils from Razor's Elemental Skill Claw and Thunder overflow, the Wolf Within will call down a Lightning Strike on a nearby enemy, dealing AoE electro damage. This also restores 7 energy to Razor, making his burst cost a little bit less. Once again, one thing to note is his C6 does have some changes. The original one has it that every 10-second Razor Sword charges up, causing the next normal attack to release lightning that deals 100% of Razor's attack. When Razor is not using Lightning Fang, a Lightning Strike on an opponent will grant Razor an Electro Sigil for Claw and Thunder. This will change to additionally have it that Razor gains Electro Sigils through his Elemental Skill Claw and Thunder, that he will gain 3 sigils instead. For 15 seconds after consuming these Electro Sigils, Razor's crit rate is increased by 10 and crit damage by 50%. Overall, for an older character that doesn't particularly have a niche anymore, I think these buffs are okay. I don't think they're going to be game-changing, but for any of you that do enjoy playing Razor, I'm sure a 50% crit damage buff is going to be significant for you. The one thing of note, every single character, in order to activate these buffs and to do the quest for them to get these buffs, have to be a minimum of level 70. But just make sure that if you are interested in getting any of the buffs for these units, that you do ascend them to level 70. One thing we will go over whilst we are here, whilst they are not necessarily getting a buff this patch, we will talk about the Hexerei buff that Durin does receive for having a Hexerei party member. The only thing that you need to know about his buff is that Durin will increase all effects of the Ascension talent Light Manifest of the Divine Calculus, except for its duration by 75%. This passive talent is that Durin will trigger different buffs depending on the form that his power manifests as when he unleashes his elemental burst. If he is Dragon of White Flame, after nearby party members trigger Burning, Overload, Pyro Swirl, or Pyro Crystallize reactions, or deal Pyro or Dendro damage to an opponent affected by burning, the opponent's Pyro res and the res for the corresponding element involved in the reaction are decreased by 20%. However, if he is in Dragon of Dark Decay, Durin's Vaporize damage is increased by 40% and his Melt damage is increased by 40% as well. So with that bearing in mind, the Hexenzirkel buff for him is relatively significant. If you're doing Pyro Crystallize, Albedo is an easy choice, Overload, Fischl would be an easy choice. I believe Pyro Swirl is also included in that, so again, Venti could be an interesting option. Overall, I think Durin's going to be an interesting character, and I think that buffing these older units alongside him, I think is a really good choice. Overall, I think that the precedent that they're setting of buffing older units is fantastic. We are in the 6th year of Genshin Impact, and these older units do need reworking. I think that the way that they've done it seems fair, it seems even, and it seems like they put some really interesting thoughts into what they want to do for the future. I think with newer units that are coming out that are naturally going to be Hexerei based, for example Alice, Nicole, and even to some extent I think Varka will have some sort of Hexerei buff, given that he runs Mondstadt. I think it's going to be interesting to see where it comes next. I have talked in the Discord with some people about potentially getting Knight of Favonius buffs in the future. I think that would be really interesting. I think Liyue based ones ones would be really cool. I just like the concept of buffing older units, and whilst you're at it, Genshin, I'd really appreciate it if you could update their models, because I cannot look at Albedo's bug eyes any longer. But thank you so much for watching today's video. I really truly do appreciate it. Thank you so much. The next video that will be posted will be my Durin summon / Durin viewer summons, and we will also be doing the Archon quest for Luna 3. Thank you once again to today's sponsor, Niba. If you are interested in checking them out, I highly recommend you check out the links in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a very good day, evening, night, wherever you are. Kiss kiss, bye bye, and drive safe.